We usually imagine the Philistines as the villains of biblical stories. In many languages, the word Philistine even came to mean a crude, uncultured person. But few people recall that Philistine cities were once among the largest of their age, that their culture was sophisticated and rich, and that in technology and social organization they surpassed many of their neighbors. So let's uncover the truth buried beneath 27 centuries of forgetting. During the Late Bronze Age, Egypt dominated Canaan. Cities like Ashdod, Ashkelon, and especially Gaza served as key fortresses that helped the Egyptians control the region and major trade routes running through it. This was essentially the only land corridor linking Mesopotamia and Egypt. Caravans made their last stop here before reaching the Nile Delta, and ships sailing down the coast from the north also paused in these ports. All of this brought Egypt substantial wealth. But around the turn of the 13th and 12th centuries BC, disaster swept across the eastern Mediterranean. The Hittite Empire, which had ruled Anatolia for centuries, vanished without a trace. Mycenaean palaces in Greece burned. In Syria, dozens of fortified cities were destroyed or abandoned within a single generation. Pollen analysis from the Bronze Age layers shows that around 1250 BC, the region was struck by a severe drought, a climate crisis that triggered the cascading collapse of several Mediterranean civilizations, from Greece all the way to Gaza. Out of this chaos emerged the so-called Sea Peoples, a loose coalition of displaced groups fleeing famine, destruction, and the collapse of their homelands. Egypt's first recorded encounter with them came in 1208 BC, when a Libyan chieftain named Muriye allied himself with groups such as the Akhaiwasha, Lucca, and Shekelesh, Tersha, and Shurden, and launched an invasion of Egyptian territory. Merneptah mustered an army, defeated the invaders, and took many of them captive. The inhabitants of southern Canaan tried to take advantage of Egypt's instability. They rebelled and expelled the Egyptian garrisons. Merneptah responded immediately. He marched into Canaan and devastated the region. The Merneptah stele describes the campaign in stark, triumphant lines. Canaan is plundered, carried off with every evil. Ashkelon is conquered, Gezer is captured. Yanoam is as though it never existed, Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more. The main wave of the Sea Peoples reached Egypt later, under Ramesses III. Among them was a group that Egyptian sources called Peleset. They appear in several inscriptions, but the most important are the reliefs and texts from the temple of Medinet Habu, dated to around 1175 BC, and the Great Haris Papyrus, written around 1152 BC. On the reliefs, we see warriors with feathered headdresses boarding ships with bird-shaped prows. They wear segmented armor and kilt-like skirts. Ramesses III boasts that he crushed these invaders, stopped their assaults on both land and sea, and captured many of them alive. After his victory, he resettled part of the captives in southern Canaan, the Peleset in Gaza, Ashdod, and Ashkelon, and the Tajikar in the port city of Dor, further north. Most likely Ramesses, like the rulers before him, settled these groups along Egypt's borders so they could serve as a living buffer against future incursions. The resettlement took place peacefully because it happened with the pharaoh's approval. In the archaeological layers from this period, we see no traces of destruction, fire, or battle, nothing that would suggest a military invasion. Even so, the Peleset who were moved into Canaan remained a minority compared to the local Semitic population, which despite Merneptah's devastation, continued to live there. Over time, the Peleset blended with the Semitic inhabitants, and from this mixture emerged a new people, those whom Hebrew sources called Pelishtim, known today as the Philistines. At the beginning of the 11th century BC, they established a confederation of 5 city-states along the southern coast: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath, the Philistine Pentapolis. Each city was ruled by a Saran, a political title found nowhere else in the ancient Near East. Each Saran governed his own city, but in foreign affairs, the 5 city-states acted together, presenting a unified front and making collective decisions for an entire confederation. The exact homeland of the Peleset is still uncertain. According to biblical tradition, the Philistines came from a place called Caphtor. The Bible doesn't specify where Caphtor was, but it has been long associated with Crete, since in many ancient languages, the island's name sounds similar. The Egyptians called it Keftiu, and the Assyrians and Babylonians Keptara. A growing body of evidence points to an Aegean origin for the Philistines. Their material culture is filled with clear Aegean elements. Philistine pottery, both in shape and decoration, closely resembles Mycenaean and Cypriot ceramics. Yet mineral analysis of the clay shows that these vessels weren't imported. They were made locally in Canaan. Consider, for example, this figurine of a Cypriot warrior. It looks remarkably similar to Egyptian depictions of Peleset warriors. Or look at this figurine of a Philistine goddess. Her name is unknown, so archaeologists call her Ashdoda, after the city where she was found. Now compare her with a similar goddess figurine from Cyprus. Traditional Canaanite households used clay ovens for cooking, but in Philistine towns we suddenly find hearths made from sea pebbles, a form typical of the Aegean islands. Architectural details, burial customs, and many other aspects of Philistine material culture all point in the same direction. Their roots lie in the Aegean world. Some scholars have recently suggested that the Philistines may have come from what is now Syria. This idea is based on Luwian inscriptions mentioning a Syrian state called Wollaston or Palestine. In Luwian, the sounds W, PH, and P often alternate, but this theory rests almost entirely on the similarity of names. The capital of Wollaston has been excavated, and everything there points to a Neo-Hittite population. Moreover, the state appears to have existed not before the Philistines arrived in Canaan, but at the same time. Another hypothesis suggests that a small offshoot of the Philistines may indeed have settled in Syria, but they were quickly absorbed by the local Syro-Hittite population. In 2019, DNA analysis from Philistine cemeteries showed that early Iron Age Philistines carried 25 to 70% Southern European ancestry, closely related to ancient populations of the Aegean, Sardinia, and the Iberian Peninsula. So overall, we can confidently say that the Philistines came from the wider Aegean world, but pinpointing their exact homeland remains impossible for now. Some evidence points towards Crete in the Mycenaean Greece, while others point towards Cyprus or the Aegean Islands. It may well be the Peleset were not a single people at all, but rather a coalition of tribes from different parts of the Aegean. Their language could have shed much more light on their origins, but the evidence is extremely scant. All we have are a few Philistine words preserved in biblical texts, a handful of personal names, and some toponyms, enough to suggest that their language was likely Indo-European, but little more. A few Philistine tablets have been found with symbols resembling Cypriot linear script, but scholars disagree on whether this Philistine linear writing is actually related to the Cypriot system. The shapes and combinations of the signs differ noticeably. Later on, the Philistines adopted the Phoenician alphabet, but by that time they had already completely shifted to a Semitic language. The Philistines became Semitized with remarkable speed. Within just 2 centuries, by around 1000 BC, the European genetic signature visible in the earliest Philistine burials disappears. Intermarriage with the local population diluted the newcomers' genes so thoroughly that no trace remained. Genetically, they became indistinguishable from the surrounding Semitic peoples. Yet for another 400 years, everyone, including the Philistines themselves, continued to call them Philistines. Their culture assimilated just as quickly. In the Aegean world that they had left behind, female deities stood at the center of religious life, the tradition of the great goddess, reflected in the characteristic figurines found at Philistine sites such as Ashdod. But by the 11th century BC, this female-centered pantheon had almost entirely disappeared, replaced by the gods of Canaan. Their chief deity became Dagon, an ancient grain god worshipped by the Amorites in Syria since at least the 23rd century BC. Great temples of Dagon stood in Gaza and Ashdod. In Ekron, the people venerated Baal-zebub. The Philistines also worshipped Astarte, Anat, and other West Semitic deities. At first, the Philistine city-states recognized Egypt's authority and paid tribute. But in the middle of the 11th century BC, Egypt entered a period of turmoil, fragmentation, civil conflicts, and internal wars. With Egypt too distracted to maintain control over Canaan, the Philistines threw off Egyptian rule. Their main opponents were the Israelites, living to the north and east, and likely also the Amalekites and Edomites, whose lands bordered Philistia from the south. We know almost nothing about Philistine conflicts with the Amalekites and Edomites, but the wars with the Israelites are preserved in biblical tradition. In the beginning, the Israelites were a loose coalition of sub-ethnic groups, what the Bible calls the 12 tribes of Israel. In these early centuries, the Philistines had a significant advantage over the Israelites. Their strength lay in their internal unity. The Philistines always acted as a single front, while the tribes of Israel acted independently. As the book of Judges says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." According to the Bible, there were even moments when one Israelite tribe sided with the Philistines against another. The Philistines' second major advantage was technological. They were the first people in Canaan to adopt iron weaponry on a large scale, a technology they almost certainly brought with them. Archaeologists uncovered plenty of Philistine iron weapons, swords, spearheads, axes, as well as iron tools. It seems that for a time the Philistines even forbade selling iron weaponry to the local Semitic tribes. The Bible mentions that David and Solomon owned iron swords, which were viewed as symbols of high status. But as the knowledge of smelting and forging iron spread across the Near East, the Israelites also transitioned to large-scale use of iron. These advantages meant the battles against the Israelites generally went in the Philistines' favor. The tribes of Israel fell under Philistine domination. In one battle, according to the Bible, the Philistines even captured Israel's most sacred object, the Ark of the Covenant, though they later returned it. Philistia's borders expanded eastward, and Philistine governors appeared in many Israelite towns. That advantage faded around 1000 BC. Burdened by Philistine rule, the Israelite tribes began to unite under a single authority, and Israel gained its first king, Saul, who fought the Philistines only with mixed success. This period also includes the famous story of David and Goliath. Goliath was an unusually tall and powerful warrior from the Philistine city of Gath. Before the battle, he stepped forward and challenged Israel's best fighter to single combat, and when no one accepted, he taunted the Israelites as cowards. Then the young David approached and killed Goliath with a single well-aimed stone from his sling. Archaeology adds an intriguing detail. During excavations at Gath, an ostracon dated to the early 9th century BC was found with the letters GLYT scratched into it. Most scholars interpret this as a form of the name Goliath. It's far too bold to claim that this was the biblical Goliath himself, but the inscription strongly suggests that the name Goliath was indeed used among the inhabitants of Gath at that time. After Saul's death, David became king of Israel. Interestingly, while Saul was still alive, David fell out of favor and had to take refuge among the Philistines, even entering their service. And later, once he became king, Philistine mercenaries formed his personal bodyguard. As king, David dealt several heavy defeats to the Philistines. Archaeology shows that Ekron and Gath were destroyed in the mid-9th century BC. These losses undermined the old political system. Instead of being ruled collectively by Sarons, each Philistine city effectively became a separate kingdom, and they stopped coordinating their actions. The military disaster forced a political reorganization. Even so, the Philistine cities retained their independence, even though they paid tribute to David and later his successor, Solomon. When the United Monarchy split into Israel and Judah around 930 BC, the Philistine cities regained their independence and soon found themselves in frequent border conflicts with both kingdoms. In 843 BC, the Philistines, together with allied Arab tribes, even captured and plundered the Judean capital, Jerusalem. But this period also marks the beginning of Philistia's decline. At the same time, Phoenicia entered its golden age and took control of Mediterranean maritime trade, dramatically reducing the importance of Philistine port cities. Joppa and Dor eventually fell under Phoenician control. And then the Assyrians arrived. In 735 BC, after successful campaigns in Anatolia, Urartu, and Media, Tiglath-Pileser III consolidated his rule and turned his attention to the wealthy cities and kingdoms along the Canaanite coast. A large anti-Assyrian coalition formed, bringing together Rezin, king of Damascus, the Phoenician cities under Hiram of Tyre, several Arabian tribes, the northern kingdom of Israel, and the Philistine cities of Gaza and Ashkelon. The king of Judah, Ahaz, however, chose to side with Assyria. The fighting lasted several years and ended with the destruction of the Aramean kingdom and the Assyrian capture of its capital, Damascus. Tiglath-Pileser's victory was so decisive that the remaining members of the anti-Assyrian coalition, including the Philistine city-states, laid down their arms and submitted to Assyria, becoming its vassals. Egypt was the only real counterweight to Assyria. By then it had recovered from its internal crisis, but Egypt preferred to maintain a buffer zone of Canaanite states, Israel, Judah, and the Philistine cities, between itself and a powerful expansionist Assyria. For the next 2 centuries, regional politics followed a predictable pattern. Whenever a revolt erupted somewhere in the Assyrian Empire, one or several Canaanite states would rise up as well, encouraged by Egypt. But Egypt's support was mostly moral. It almost never sent troops. In 724 BC, King Hoshea of Israel, relying on Egyptian backing, refused to pay tribute to Assyria. Shalmaneser V besieged Samaria, Israel's capital, and after a 2-year siege, destroyed it. His successor, Sargon II, deported its inhabitants. In 712 BC, Ekron and Gath also rebelled with Egyptian encouragement. Sargon II crushed the revolt within 2 years, destroying both cities, though Ekron was later rebuilt. In 704 BC, Judah rebelled. The Assyrian king Sennacherib ravaged the entire country and besieged Jerusalem. King Hezekiah saved the capital only by paying an enormous ransom. And so it went. Over time, the Philistine cities lost virtually all political autonomy. During periods without rebellions or war, however, the Philistine cities prospered. Under foreign rule, they grew wealthy and became economic powerhouses. In the 7th century BC, their cities expanded rapidly. Ekron, for instance, grew to 35 hectares, which is around 85 acres, becoming one of the largest cities in the Near East. Chaotic early layouts gave way to deliberate urban planning, wide streets, residential districts, industrial quarters. It's in this era that Philistia became the largest producer of olive oil in the ancient world. Along the inner edge of Ekron's fortification walls, archaeologists uncovered more than 100 industrial olive presses, a production complex capable of yielding over 1,000 tons of oil a year, an extraordinary figure for that time. Under Assyrian rule, the Philistines elevated oil production to a truly industrial scale, exporting their product throughout the ancient Near East. But in the early 6th century BC, some of these presses closed as a powerful competitor emerged. Ionian Greeks revived trade in the southern Mediterranean, drove down prices, and undercut Philistia's profitable oil exports to Egypt. At the end of the 7th century BC, the Assyrian Empire collapsed and was replaced by the Neo-Babylonian Empire. In 604 BC, on the orders of Nebuchadnezzar II, the Babylonian army captured, plundered, and destroyed Ashkelon, carrying its king into captivity. The Babylonian Chronicle records the exact date, and modern excavations reveal thick destruction layers filled with ash. That same year, Nebuchadnezzar II destroyed Gaza and Ekron after a Philistine revolt. Some Philistine rulers appealed to Egypt for help against Babylon, but Egypt offered nothing. After 6 centuries on the Mediterranean coast, the brief independence the Philistines had regained after Assyria's fall came to an end under the weight of the Babylonian conquest. Nebuchadnezzar II deported much of the population of the conquered Philistine cities to Mesopotamia. Babylonian ration lists from the 6th century BC mention the descendants of Aga, the last king of Ashkelon, who was held in captivity along with his family. For decades, deportees in Babylonia continued to identify themselves in administrative documents as people of Gaza or people of Ashkelon. The Nippur Archive, dating to the late 5th century BC, records individuals still associated with these cities. These are the last known references to people who identify themselves as Philistines before their trace disappears from history. By the end of the 5th century BC, after about a century and a half in exile, those who once called themselves Philistines had completely lost any distinct ethnic identity and were absorbed into the wider Mesopotamian population. 6 centuries after arriving amid the Bronze Age collapse, the Philistines vanished as a people. In the Persian period, after 539 BC, the coastal lands of former Philistia were resettled, but now by Phoenicians, and almost nothing of Philistine culture survived. New populations took root on the old Philistine coast. Ekron is still mentioned in the 2nd century BC in the first book of Maccabees. But after its destruction in 604 BC, the city was never fully rebuilt. The name endured, but the site remained in ruins. Modern Gaza, built atop ancient Philistine Gaza, has endured such a long and turbulent history of continuous settlement that the archaeological layers from the Philistine period have almost been completely erased. It is the only city of the Pentapolis that cannot be properly excavated. The Philistines' most enduring legacy is their name. From Peleset and Pelishtim becomes the ancient term for the region between Syria and Egypt, Palestine. It appears first in Herodotus, and then later in Aristotle, Strabo, Pliny the Elder, and even Jewish writers such as Josephus and Philo of Alexandria. And in 136 AD, after crushing the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Roman Emperor Hadrian renamed the province of Judea Syria Palestina. If you made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations and history. If you'd like to support the channel, join our Patreon or become a YouTube channel member. You get early access to new episodes, behind-the-scenes looks, and more. You can also leave a super thanks below to give us a little extra boost. If you want to listen to history on the go, check out our all-new podcast, Parabellum History. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.